And we are live on YouTube. I got the button in the corner. Hello, everybody who's joining us. Welcome to our BIPOC Zinesters panel. I'm so excited to have this conversation with these four awesome panelists. Before we begin, I invite everyone watching to join me and our panelists in pausing for a moment to acknowledge that we all currently inhabit land that has been stolen from its traditional guardians. This year we have people participating from around the country or even around the world, but here where I am in Kansas City, I'm occupying territory that belongs to the Kansa, Osage, and Shawnee nations. I would also like for us to acknowledge that our nation was built on a legacy of chattel slavery, the brutal enslavement of Black people whose exploited labor created this nation's wealth, and to affirm that Black Lives Matter. All right, with that, I think we're going to kick off this panel. Basically, on this panel, I just want to have a chance to get to know the four of you and hear about your zines and how you make zines and get some thoughts on the zine community. So just to start off, can we go around and introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, where you're from, and a little bit about your zines? I'm going to start with the person who's on top for me, which I know is going to be scrambled for everybody, but I'm going to start with Jonas.
Hello.
Jonas.
Yeah, my name's Jonas. Living in Chicago. Been making zines for too long. Oh yeah, they, them, pronouns. Gosh, I made a whole lot of zines. And I usually make them at work, but now I'm at home all the time, so much for that. Yeah, what else am I
I mean, that's it. I just want to get just introduction, I guess. I have more deeper questions about your work with zines as we go. Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump down now to Kayla.
Oh, hello. My name is Kayla Shaggy. I am Diné and Anishinaabe. My pronouns are she, they. And how I got into zine. Is that the question or the zines?
Or like, what is your zine? What is what kind of work do you do, I guess?
Oh, well, I've been working as a cultural consultant, but I also make zines. They're mostly like image-based zines, but they're based on monsters. So that's what I do.
Let's go over now to Alexa.
Hi, my name is Alexa Lima. I'm a zinester based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And sorry, I keep forgetting the different aspects of the question. Was that it, or?
Tell us a little bit about what zines you write.
So I primarily do collage-based zines, as well as I've done a zine based on music that my band made back in 2016. Yeah, that's basically it.
Cool, thank you. Carmen, can you wrap it up this question for us?
Yeah, I'm Carmen Pizarro. I'm based in New York. My pronouns are she, they. I'm an illustrator, and most of my zines consist of my illustrations and about relationships.
Awesome. I think now I want to hear a little bit more about everyone's background. I think a couple of you touched on this a little bit, but just like how long you've been making zines, what first got you into making zines, just some information about your history with zines. Let's go in the same order. Jonas, can you go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, technically I've been making zines since around the 90s, mid 90s. I took kind of hiatuses along the way, but yeah, since the 90s. So, I got into them basically. Just me and a bunch of friends used to just meet every Saturday and do whatever it is you can do in the suburbs, which is not much. And at one point, while hanging out, a friend of mine brought this huge box just filled with zines, and the night was just like going through them and reading them. And before then I hadn't even heard of zines, and by the end of the night I was hooked. And yeah, I made I was in high school at the time, and I made several zines that I'm glad I don't still own because they're probably really embarrassing. And yeah, I just kept up. It's just been a passion ever since, really.
I feel like having just a huge box of zines is a magical moment in every new zinester's life of like, oh my gosh, look at all of this here. Kayla, can we hear from you about how you first heard about zines and how long you've been making them?
So I first got into art history class in college. Like I had heard of them before, but our teacher had brought in examples. It was for art history, and I had just been like, whoa, past history, and there's been like so many different people making like zines about, you know, anything and everything, and it was just kind of like that free form media expression that got me into it. So in 2016, I wanted to make a zine, and it would be an art zine, and it would be full of monsters. It would be me drawing all these different monsters in black and white. And then I signed up for a grant program, and then I got $500, and then I was able to print out like some really nice copies. And then since then, I've been making zines.
That's super cool. Let's hear now from Alexa, a little bit about your history.
So I started making zines back in, I would say around 2015, 2016, and it was primarily for my band. We were at the time writing a new album and putting together these shows that we were incorporating social justice in, and basically partnering with a bunch of social justice organizations, and then creating a lineup of bands that could play as well. So along with that, I made a zine, my first zine then, which kind of showcased everyone that was involved with the show. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
That's cool. And also, I meant to say this during the intro, but anyone that follows the Kansas City ZineCon Instagram account, Alexa did an Instagram takeover for us a little while ago, so she seemed familiar, that's why. And now can we hear from Carmen about how you first got into zines?
Yeah, it was definitely in college. So I want to say like about like 8 years ago. I kind of like found them to be like kind of like self-promotional from like different other artists, and like checking it out through there, and it just kind of grew from that.
Cool. I think it sounds like we have people with pretty different types of zines, like ranging from some illustration to more like per zine or like writing based zines. So I would expect that you all have pretty different processes. So can I hear now a little bit about like what the zine making process looks like for each of you? And I think I actually want to start again with Carmen on this one, if that's okay.
Okay. So pretty much it just like stems like from like an idea like that I get. Like I'm working on other artwork, and I kind of like want to explore more on a subject matter. I usually use zines to kind of experiment with my artwork and kind of have fun with it. It's definitely, it started off as a side hobby, I want to say. And so it kind of like stems from that. So I started making stories, like, yeah, short stories and stuff. And then like kind of like exploring like different like themes and branching out from there.
Cool. And I think, Kayla, can we hear from you next? Because since you also do a lot of like illustration based, I think maybe it's interesting to hear you guys side by side.
Oh, okay. So usually when I make the zines, it's like, you know, the whole theme is monsters, but the inspiration I take is maybe like a monster that I made up, or a monster that's like roughly based on stories I heard growing up. Because in both of my indigenous background, Dene and Anishinaabe, we have, you know, a lot of stories about different types of monsters. So it's kind of fun to like take inspiration from that and then put it within modern context. So I usually start out with doing an illustration. Either traditionally I do it with paper, and then I ink it over, and then I erase it, or I do it all digitally on my computer. And then after that, I get all the images and edit them into a book, and then I design a cover, and that's usually how the process goes.
That's interesting. It's interesting to hear that you work both like with digital and with more like traditional pen and paper. Like it's interesting that you use both. Alexa, can we hear from you now about what your process looks like for zine making?
Yeah, so for zine making, I normally stick with the cut and paste method. For me, I have a little bit more control over what I'm doing and what I'm creating. And I use a lot of like old books, old art books a lot for my collage. And yeah, so I would say cut and paste would be my main method for my process.
Cool. And finally, Jonas, can you tell us a little bit about what making a zine looks like for you?
Yeah, I'm also cut and paste. I really like that sort of aesthetic. Um, Usually no visuals. It's just all text, cut and paste text. Um, and it usually stems from just an idea or a scenario that's just been kind of marinating in my head for months or even sometimes years. Like I'm always, just developing these ideas, and at some point, usually at work, it'll just it's like it'll just ripen. It's like time to get out, and I'll just spend the next, I don't know, week or several days just making the zine right at in my little cubicle. Just the writing, I'll just not work and just write and write and write, and then do the layouts and everything there. So that's kind of the process for me.
Do you typically like type things just kind of long form and then arrange the text later, or do you think about the text layout as you're writing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a pretty set format that I've been using for a lot of them, of either using a typewriter for it or computer, and just separating into columns. I always have the idea of how the pages are going to look. I guess to answer your question, it's
Yeah.
always in my mind, and it's just a matter of uh, yeah, using the right format to get it. So
Interesting. Thank you. I think that's a great segue also to the next thing I want to ask everybody, which is, where do you get ideas for zines? I feel like this is like the number one question that new zinesters especially, but really all zinesters have, is like, how do you come up with ideas for stuff? Actually, Jonas, can you take it away, since you kind of mentioned these ideas marinating? Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
yeah. I mean, it's all over the place. There's life experiences that it just takes me a while they take a while to process, or some idea that I had just been talking about with my wife or friends, that sort of thing, and it just kind of stayed in my mind. That's kind of the sign that I'm eventually going to make a zine about it, if it's just an idea or some sort of topic that I just can't shake. So there's that, life experiences and that. And I'd say apart from that, I mean, being a child of the 80s, like my mind is just kind of like always creating movies. It's just like it's filled with movies and always creating movies. And sometimes those movies just are things that I want to write out, things that I want to write into the page, even if it's what I'm writing isn't fiction. It's always like I just want to get that movie into a zine. So yeah.
That's interesting. It's very relatable of your brain's always making movies. I think, yeah, I'm not a child of the 80s, but I relate to that. Alexa, can we hear from you about how you come up with ideas for your zines?
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. Like when I first started, it was purely music that kind of drove that inspiration. Just being in my band and being around music all the time, it's very intoxicating, and it can just, inspire a lot of stuff. So I would say that is my primary inspiration. Also, just, nature. I love nature. Art. I come from a very creative upbringing. My mom and my brother are visual artists, so that like when I said before, a lot of art books I find a lot of inspiration in. So I would say that as well. Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting that your relationship with your mom and your brother, it feels like maybe you have just a lot of visual medium just around, and so it's easy to pull. That kind of reminds me a little bit of what you said about pulling from these childhood stories for your monster zine. Can you expand on that, or if there's any other big ways that you get ideas for zines, can you tell us about that?
So growing up, I would hear about like traditional stories, and the biggest traditional story, within Diné culture, we're also called Navajo, but Diné is the name we would prefer to be known as. But the monster slayer twins, and they would kill monsters that were terrorizing, the early Navajo people. Like Navajo people weren't really able to propagate and prosper because there's just these huge monsters running around. So, and then the story goes is that they all kind of like died, and the rock formations that are within the area I live in, in New Mexico, those are actually the corpses. So growing up, I just had this like, really great fascination with like, oh, what did they look like? What did they sound like? So I kind of drew on inspirations like that, and then also stories I've heard from other people, also movies too, classic horror movie monsters, and kind of just like wanting to create an image that's going to either really fascinate or creep someone out really badly. That's my that's my goal with the zines I make.
I was gonna say, having seen your art, yeah, you succeed at both of those things. It's interesting, and it's that kind of like, ooh, creepy, like it's a little bit, it gets you in your deep in your brain of like, ooh. Carmen, can we hear from you also about how you get ideas for your zines and your visual art?
Yeah, it is kind of all over the place. It's a combination of like my interests. So like the one that I'm working on now is just like about like horror movies that I like. And then it can range from like sketchbook scenes and stuff, and then like stories and like relationships that I want to explore. Because with like illustrations, like just kind of like a face value. As for like zines and stuff like that, kind of have like this like bridge between illustrations and comics, and it's like giving me space to kind of explore with a story, but it doesn't have to be concrete.
That actually leads well into the next question that I want to talk about, which is if you feel like your work with zines falls into like one category, or if you feel like you have stuff all over the place. Like I know for myself, I feel like, well, I write zines, but I also write fanzines. And like I think a lot of people dabble in different corners of the zine world. Do you feel like yours fall into a certain category or multiple categories? Carmen, since you were just kind of talking about that with being kind of on the line between comics and zines, can you go first on that one?
Like I definitely think my zines are more visual based, but yeah, they're kind of all over the place. Especially now because like I'm working on like a fanzine. But like for the most part, they I guess they follow my illustrations. But yeah, they don't have to like stick to like one category or specific topic.
Do you experiment with different like visual styles, or is most of your stuff kind of, if you have a very specific style that you stick to?
I kind of have a very specific style. I've definitely like made zines for myself that I haven't like really shown anyone. Just to kind of like experiment and like figure out like how I want to like approach like a specific zine. I've definitely like experimented with different mediums and like how it will affect the zine itself. So it's just more of like me just like experimenting myself for like the best like product and like end result.
Interesting. I want to hear now from Jonas, because I feel like you have a long history with zines, and I want to hear about how you feel about whether or not your work falls into one category or multiple, and how maybe you think that that may have changed over time.
Yeah, no, they're all over the place. Some, more recently were about like gender. A few of them are kind of like, racial issues were kind of snuck in there, but not a lot. Punk I talk about sometimes. Yeah, it's just mental health or mental illness. It's really just all over the place. And yeah, it's uh I won't say I'll say changed, more so than like evolved over time, just based on where my mind was at the at the moment, or in the current time. So um yeah, there's I don't think there's a direct line from A to B. It's just a squiggle all over the place. So yeah.
For sure. Can I hear next from Alexa? Because I feel like maybe you'll relate to that idea, since it sounds like your zines really started with music and then have progressed from there.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. Yeah, so I started with music scenes, and that kind of with linking up with different creatives in Atlanta as far as like visual and writers and stuff. I've been able to use or to have them in my compilation zines, and then that has kind of inspired me to sort of create my own like blackout poetry zines or more collage zines. So like Jonah said, I mean, I don't think there is like A to B kind of string that you can, mine is definitely all over the place as well. So.
Cool. And finally, can we hear from Kayla about how you feel about how your zines fit into a category or not?
I know they get categorized into more of like comics, even though there's no text at all in the books. But the style is, black and white graphic illustrations. Lately, though, I've been branching out into different collaborative zines. There was one about indigenous food futurisms, so I did a comic about that. And then the one I most recently participated in was about decolonization. So I guess I kind of pigeonholed myself into more illustrative stuff, but illustrative and comic book stuff. But I don't mind. I think those two mediums can offer a lot in expression.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And similar to what I think everyone on the panel has said, it's something that changes over time. So definitely, don't feel pigeonholed, I guess. Like if you have you can write a text zine, I would gladly read it. And speaking of somewhat similar to that, can we kind of hear from everybody about some advice that you might give somebody who's thinking about starting a zine or getting into zines for the first time? Because I think hopefully a lot of people watching at home or participating in Kansas City ZineCon virtually maybe haven't made a zine before, and this is kind of their first introduction to that. And I would love for you all to give them some advice since you're all such, good experienced Zinesters. Can I start with Alexa?
I'd probably say just kind of jump in there and do it. I mean, if you're passionate about something, use that passion to create zines. I've found in my experience that that's the way to go. I feel like you can reach a lot of more people that way and relate to more people that way. So yeah, just follow your passion and just jump in and do it.
Good advice. Kayla, can we hear from you what you would recommend for anyone watching?
I would say have fun and don't worry about whether it looks perfect or not, because I kind of like the rough look of some zines. But just overall have fun, like coming up with the idea, have fun, making it and, distributing it. I think that's a pretty important thing to do, because I think as long as you're having fun, it's not going to feel like a chore to do.
That's good
difficult.
Advice. Yeah. Well, especially as I feel like maybe you relate to this, or I'm sure a lot of people would relate to this, that I have fun starting a zine, but I don't always have as much fun finishing a zine. So I think remembering to keep the fun throughout is really good advice. Thank you. Carmen, what about you? What would you advise people who are getting started?
I'd definitely say start off small. I know that as they get further into making more zines and stuff, they get longer, and it definitely becomes a daunting challenge. So I think having the attention span for a smaller zine, you still are in that fun aspect as was said before. So it's not a chore.
Good advice. And finally, Jonas, could you provide some advice for anyone who's watching?
Well, besides what has already been said, I would just say, as you're making your zine, don't think in terms of who's going to read it. Well, I mean, there's things that you want to disclose or don't disclose, but I mean, just don't think in terms of an audience. When I got back into zines a little bit later in life, I didn't think that anyone was going to read them. I thought there's a local bookstore here, Quimby's, and that was one of the first places I went to send off my zines to have them sold. And I really didn't think anyone was going to read them. I thought it was just going to get lost in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of zines they had there. And I kind of made my peace with that. So it felt really liberating to just write, almost like I'm writing a letter to no one, and just send it off. And so when people actually started buying them or and reading them, I was pretty taken aback. And but at the same time, I felt that it was just sort of unfiltered that way. I said what I meant, and didn't feel, nervous about the kind of person that was going to read it, or if anyone was going to read it, or any sort of judgment, because it's out there, just I keep referring to an analogy of putting a letter, a letter in a bottle and just kind of throwing it out to sea. That's kind of what it felt like for me. And then, lo and behold, someone found it. So.
That's interesting. And forgive me, all of you, I'm going to ask a question that wasn't on the sheet. And if you don't have a prepared answer, that's fine. But Jonas, you just made me think of this. Can you talk or give some advice about how to distribute your zines? I think for a lot of people getting started, like, okay, I have a zine, now what do I do to get this out to people? Can you talk a little bit about how you figured out how to get your zines out into the world and give some advice on that? And Jonas, can you start?
Well, there's traditionally what people do, and then there's what I did. I think traditionally people will either take their zine to a bookstore, or register for a zine fest or zine con and sell them there, or use a distro. He distributes zines, distro. I'm sure everyone here knows what that is. And then sell your zine through that. For me, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I would just send my zines or walk my zines to any place I thought that, could possibly even sell it. So I went to record stores, I went to bookstores. I went to like jewelry stores. I went to like a bunch of places, and I was just kind of like, hey, I've got these. Would you sell them? And if you won't sell them, would you just like leave them someplace and people can just take them? So I just did everything possible. And the idea of like zine fests and distros, like that didn't even come into my mind until much later.
Interesting. Kayla, can I hear from you how you maybe got started selling your zines or getting them out into the world?
So the first scene I made was the monstrous scene, and that was done partway through like the grant. And then it was nice because it was the art gallery that was doing the grant system. So when they announced that I had, won it, they kind of told everyone in the town. It was the college town. So I kind of just went to the bookstore, and then in a different town, I went to the comic book store, and then I advertised it online. And then I just went to a lot of different like small vendoring events, and it just slowly like grew from there. And kind of just having like that physical form of a book that you could take out and just show someone, I think really helps with that process. Like there was people that I didn't even know, would be interested in the book, and I didn't find out until I had, directly given it to them. So, and libraries too. I would often go to libraries and ask if it was okay to donate one.
That's really good advice. And especially like we just had a really wonderful workshop from a curator at the Ohio State University Special Collections talking about zine collections. So thank you for bringing that up. If you have a zine, I'm sure there's a library nearby that would love to have it. Carmen, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience selling and destroying zines?
Yeah, like as mentioned before, like zine cons and stuff like that, even if you're not tabling, like doing trades and stuff, it's always like a nice like little like I guess promo is like how I would use it. So it's like a conversation starter with like a lot of people like in the community. And then I would also leave them at like kind of like the like community bookshelves that are here in New York. So like that's like another way to kind of like get them out there into like new eyes and stuff.
For sure. And finally, Alexa, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience specifically with destroying zines?
Yeah, so with destroying zines, I kind of caught on to that a little bit later on in my zine exploration. But before like I mentioned before, I started making zines at like for shows and stuff like that. So I would actually have them out at shows or at, different bars or venues and stuff. And then further on into my journey as a zinester, I actually had a part-time job at a library, and I actually started a zine library there. And so a bunch of people would donate them there. I would, you know, have a little drop box if I could put them in. So libraries definitely are a good source to getting your zines out there. But yeah, distros are awesome too. So shout out to Wasted Ink zine distro. They're awesome. But yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody, for giving some advice on that, especially since I didn't tell you I was going to ask you about that in advance. I appreciate that. Now I kind of want to pivot the conversation a little bit to talking about less about like your immediate zine work and more about some of the stuff going on in the greater zine community. So in addition to some of the more like obvious and overt forms of racism, a lot of BIPOC creators have, I've heard, are subjected to more subtle things like erasure and gatekeeping. Is that something that you feel like has gotten better in the zine community over time, or has it stayed the same, or has it even gotten worse? Can you just tell us a little bit what you think about that? And can I start with Carmen?
Yeah, in my experience at least, it's definitely gotten better, but I've also like kind of changed the zine events and festivals and stuff that I go to. So one that I went to last year was Blue Stockings Queer and Trans Fest, and it was like zines and like illustrations and stuff like that. So it's definitely been better in recent years, but it definitely can be kind of gatekeepy with like the approval of like getting a table and like trying to get out there with like some of like the zine cons.
Yeah, for sure. Alexa, what do you think about this question?
I think it's gotten a little bit better since, in my experience, since I've started zine making. But there is, you know, some subtleties, especially at like zine fests and cons and stuff like that. I've experienced that over time. So yeah, I would probably say it's a little bit better, but it's still there.
And it sounds like, based on what you and similar to what Carmen just said, that it kind of seems like it varies from event to event. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kayla, what do you think?
I can't speak on a nationwide level, or I guess because I come from like a really rural community. I know that when I first came out with the book, it was like nobody knew what a zine was. I would often have to be explaining what it was. And, you know, I won't delve into it, but I've had some pretty bad personal experiences. And for me, I think for the rural part of it, I think it's bad. Maybe gotten a little worse. But from what I'm hearing and from what I'm seeing, you know, from different conventions that are being more inclusive, I think it's gotten better.
Thanks for providing that perspective from a more rural perspective, because I think a lot of zine activity tends to be more concentrated in cities. So it's interesting to hear from somebody outside of that. Mm-hmm. Jonas, what do you think?
I'm not sure I feel that it's gotten better or worse. I mean, there's what I've experienced at Zine Fest, which, you know, is, you know, tabling, and sometimes people will walk right by the table and not even give it a certain look after looking at me, just kind of like, oh, I don't think that person has anything, you know, that's any common ground, anything that I want to read about. And just sort of bypass it without even looking, you know. So I've experienced that actually within the community. I mean, I've made like a ton of friends just through the, you know, through the zine community. But I would say the sort of, I hate to use the word racism, but yeah, racism that I've experienced was really more subtle, you know, because the community sort of prides itself on being very, you know, liberal to radical, right? So so yeah, so the racism might come in forms of you know, not being included in something, or you know, just a comment here or there. That's probably the worst, is, you know, being in sort of an intimate conversation with somebody and they let something slip, you know, that they don't they genuinely don't think is racist, or make a racial comment about some other ethnic group and just think that there's going to be some sort of like camaraderie about it, you know. And I'm left just kind of usually quietly just thinking, you know, oh no, you're racist, you know. And yeah, so I think that's most of what I've experienced. So
talking a little bit about what you said about maybe people just walking by your table and thinking that I don't have anything in common with you because of your race. What do you all think is something that white people can be doing to help improve this? Since I think being the oppressor in this situation, the burden really falls on us to be the ones to try to make the situation better and try to be more inclusive and be more anti-racist. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on what we could be doing? Jonas, can you start with this one?
I guess that's a tough one because especially at a zine fest, it can't mean just like, you know, tokenizing the few, you know, non-white zinesters that are going to be there, you know, because that obviously doesn't help at all. I think just, I guess maybe educating yourself on, you know, on educating oneself on their own time, and then just kind of bringing that back into the community, as opposed to expecting the things they find at a zine fest to just kind of lay it all out for them. I mean, there are like tons and tons of resources out there to address the situation, you know. And then when you get to something like a zine fest, you won't necessarily, well, hopefully you wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, I'm not gonna go to that person's table, or I'm gonna, you know, pigeonhole that person into like, well, obviously he's black, so he's going to be writing about black issues, and I don't feel like reading about that, so I'm going to go over here, you know. And just to not have that mentality and just work through that by just, I guess, educating yourself, doing your reading, or whatever it is that can get you past that point. So
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and jump down to Kayla now, and it's okay. I think the actual takeaway of this question is that as white people, we need to educate ourselves. So it's okay if that's really what the answer from everybody is, but I just want to give everybody a chance to speak to this question. Kayla, can you go ahead?
I would definitely say, you know, work towards giving a platform to more marginalized zinesters, giving them the space, and then also, you know, educating yourself and not just depending on others to educate you, because, you know, emotional labor. And talking more about the space, there was a thing that my college did for me that was really nice, because when I was an art student there, most of my teachers were white, and the art that I was doing they didn't really like, and I couldn't really say anything about it because, you know, I was a student, I just wanted my degree. So I kind of got ignored after I graduated, even though I was making so many strides within the art world. And something nice that happened that, you know, gave space and gave a platform to me, and this is an example I think other people can learn from. You know, I talked to the college library, and the one of the librarians working there was just really interested in my work. So she said, would you like if we made space for you in the library to make an exhibit where you can talk about your creative process, and you can put your original art up there, and you can put like little text stuff on there to explain to people about your journey. And, you know, it's such a small thing, it only lasted for a month, but it was a really like big step towards, you know, recognizing the underrepresented.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really great example for others to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Carmen, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, like definitely looking like at yourself and like what like you can do better of like at least like communicating with BIPOC like artists and stuff, but also that there's like kind of like an alienation between like white and like non-white people, that they think that, I don't know, like that because these experiences are different from theirs, that there's just like a disconnection, and taking that energy to like reconnect to like the stories that like POC and like Black Indigenous like artists are like creating.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, Alexa, can you speak to this if you feel like you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just piggyback off of everyone else's response with I definitely believe in the education aspect of it. And then also just using that education and that knowledge to then, if you are at a Zine Fest or a Zine Con or just out in the community where you are surrounded by other or by BIPOC people, if you see something or if you hear something that is being said that should not be said, then say something about it, you know, call it out. Yeah, so I would say education, and then if you see something, say something.
Absolutely. Good advice from everybody. Thank you so much to everybody for sharing about that topic, for all of our audience members, especially those of our audience members who are white. My next question kind of in this region is to ask if your zines address racism directly, or if you feel like they address it indirectly, or if it's just not something that you tend to include in your zines, and if it's something that you would consider, maybe if you haven't previously touched on, maybe if that's something you're thinking about adding now. Alexa, can you go first on this one?
Yeah, so I would say my zines, specifically the ones that I created for my band and the social justice shows that we used to put on, I would say that I addressed racism pretty directly in those. So my Wake ATL zine 1 through 5 issues definitely directly address it. And then in more of my collage zines, I would say I more or less directly bring awareness to it, but in a different way, not just through words, but through images and stuff like that. So I would say yes, I typically do.
As a follow-up to that, how do you feel like you address it differently in text versus in more visual media? What does that look like for you?
Just, you know, well, in words, obviously you can be a little bit more direct. In imagery, kind of just using the collage medium to create, I don't know, images that can depict racism and social justice topics that are going on in our country. Yeah. I don't really, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Carmen, what about you? Is racism something that your zines really confront, or what they involve?
It's definitely not a focal point. There's probably like a little bit more like subtle like undertones of like with like inclusion stuff with my zines, but like not like being like the main topic. But something I definitely want to explore, because like there is like, especially with like the Latinx like community, there is like colorism and like racism like within that, and it's not just like geared towards like whiteness and like white people.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to hear that you are thinking about addressing that more directly in the future. Is there anything in particular, or is it just more so because we're talking about it now?
It's always been like a topic, but it's like you definitely have to come from like an educated stance from it, and I feel like there has to be like a lot of care with like how you portray it. So it's definitely something that I've wanted to like talk about and like include in my zines, but just like going about it in the right way.
For sure. Thank you. Kayla, what about you? Do you feel like your zines address racism directly or not?
So there was a comic I made recently. I guess it could be called a zine. People were calling it a zine too. But it was called like Godzilla Decolonizes Durango. And it was just about my like experiences living in a really racist town when I was in college. And it was kind of like the first time I had ever made an kind of autobiographical, you know, content with really strong like context about racism, and the reaction from it was really crazy. You know, like there was indigenous people and other, you know, BIPOC people just being like, yeah, I totally get it, you know. And then the experience from like, you know, the white audience, it was mostly like, why did you have to make that, you know? And I'm kind of glad I did made it, because it really opened up a discussion point about this like racist sign that's in town. So now there's like a movement to take it down. And I won't say that it was all because of me with my zine, but I think, putting those words and images into a format that people could read about an issue that's, really close to home and really important, I think really helps with improving things. So definitely, yeah, it was something that I didn't think was going to happen, but now I'm going to be focusing on that more in my zines.
Thanks for sharing about that. I think that's such a great example of how zines can be part of a greater activist culture. I think, Alexa, your zines are kind of in that similar boat where it's really like the zine is part of a greater movement. And thanks for sharing about that specific example. It's really interesting. Jonas, what about you? Do you feel like your zines address racism or not, or how so?
Mostly no. It's been so in some zines it's been sort of incidental. In a couple zines I've addressed it full on, but for the most part I feel like there are certain things that, even though I'll write openly about, mental illness or death, suicide, things like that. Some things are just so frustrating to unbearable to live with that I really just have no desire to revisit it in a zine. And the contrast, might not make any sense. It's kind of actually, it's kind of, if you bear with me for a second, this will make sense. But an uncle of mine once said, he was in the Vietnam War, right? And he said that all the stuff that he saw in the Vietnam War, all the like blood, the death, the just the abhorrent things that he saw there, he was able to sort of condition himself to. But when he had a son, he was totally freaked out by, when it would like defecate, and like after all the awful things that he actually saw, this one, gross thing is what, just that was his limit, and so to a sort of more extreme, it's kind of like I can talk about the worst things in my head, but sometimes I just hit that brick wall when it comes to racism. It's like I've lived it. I've been stopped for no reason by the police more than once. I've been called the N-word to somebody just like driving past me. Like there's been so many instances of that, and yeah, it's just something that I don't feel the need to write about at this point for the most part.
Totally understandable, and thank you for sharing about that. I really appreciate you opening up about your experience, and that goes for everybody. I have another off-book question, pretty quick since we still have a few minutes left. I want to know maybe how you all think that zines compare to other forms of activism or other forms of media in terms of activism. So how do you feel like zines fit into activism differently or similarly to, like, for instance, social media or other like more traditional forms of mass media? What role do you think that zines kind of play in that scene? And I'm wondering if I can hear first from Kayla, since like you mentioned, your autobiographical zine kind of became part of an activist movement.
I think it can definitely be like a zine can be a teaching tool, because I feel like especially with everything going on recently with the protests, there was a lot of talk about, oh, we need to be reading more texts to learn more about these situations and the history. And for a lot of people, it can be inaccessible reading text like that because it can be academic mumbo jumbo, and it's like, oh well, what do we do? So with zines, I think that combination of imagery, text, and people, who are writing from their very own real experiences, it can become more relatable and more useful. So I think that's how they kind of fit in within activism.
Yeah, for sure. Alexa, do you have anything to add to this one?
Yeah, honestly not. I agree with Kayla. They're definitely really good tools, and I really believe in the accessibility of them as well, because just handing them out at shows, like a lot of people at our shows probably wouldn't have any idea, you know, about the specific issues that we were talking about in our zine. They probably didn't even know what a zine was. So just to be able to like hand something to someone and be like, hey, read this, or hey, read that, you know, check this out. It's awesome. So yeah, I really think zines are a powerful tool as far as activism goes.
Absolutely. Carmen, what do you think about zines and how they relate to activism?
I thought Kayla and yeah, like just like the accessibility of like zines. It's like you can be like from like all flocks of life, being able to like access this and like distribute it like by hand or like other means or like leaving it places and stuff. And it's nice to be able to reach so many like different like types of people with zines. Like zines is like very like punk like way of like distributing like literature and stuff. So it's definitely come through the ages to be able to like convey these ideas.
For sure. Jonas, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I guess, I mean, there's the obvious way. Like I personally, like zines introduced me to socialism, you know, just reading a bunch of zines on that. That's was like my 101 to that. And then I went on from there, progressed from there. But yes, not as obvious. I mean, in zines for as long, or at least per zines, the the personal as the way that zines can resonate with you, kind of goes into that to activism. I remember sending a batch of zines to a friend of mine, you know, one of my closest friends that lives in Germany, and after reading them, she came back and said that even the ones that had nothing to do with the political state of the country, still, it seemed to feature all the problems, you know, in that country, whether, you know, like the way that, you know, mental illness is addressed, or the way, the shape of the punk scene, and all of that just kind of addresses the society that, you know, we live in. And she just thought it was so drastically different than her experiences there. And yeah, I think, you know, at least speaking for Perzines, I think you know, whether it's intentional or not, it exhibits just the political climate of the times. So.
Absolutely. And yeah, I love this. I think that's one of the things I love about zines is that, and this goes back to things that everyone has said, that even a zine that's not, like you said, political, being able to read about somebody else's experience who's different than you is a very powerful education tool. So thanks for sharing about that specifically with your perzines. I think that's all the questions that I had for you all. I really appreciate you all being here. I'm hoping that we get the chance to do this again, something similar, or another panel like this in future years in person. I would love for you all to come to Kansas City, be with us in person. But real quick, I want to go around and have everybody recommend a zine that they think that the people in our audience should check out if they haven't heard of it already. I'm going to start at the top for me, which is Jonas.
Well, there's probably the most well-known one. It's called Shotgun Seamstress. If you're getting into zines and you're not familiar with that, you just need to get it. You know, it's available online. Most bookstores that actually carry zines will carry like the Shotgun Seamstress anthology. I would just do whatever you can to seek that out. Primarily, it deals with Black punk, but its topics vary within, and I just think it's essential reading. That's
yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, Jonas. Kayla, what about you? Do you have a recommendation for the audience?
I think it's still in distribution. It's called Eminent Cuisine. It's a indigenous food zine, and there's poems, there's text, there's images, and it's kind of like the first indigenous zine I've seen that really kind of touched on the relationship, you know, we have with food, and I just think it's really cool, and it's just lots of cool stuff in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Alexa, what about you? What's your recommendation?
So I would love to recommend Nikki Miner's Chicory Zine. She was on the panel from yesterday. It's just chock filled with, information on herbalism and how to use the herbs in your community, and to create different medicines and tinctures and stuff that you can use in your everyday life. So I would recommend her Chicory issue 1 and 2.
Absolutely. And yeah, if you missed our panel yesterday, that included Nikki, it is available to be rewatched on our YouTube channel. So definitely check that out. Carmen, can you bring it home for us with your recommendation for the audience?
Yeah, it's a zine from one of my peers by Kathy G. Johnson. It's called Black Hole Heart. It's up for a Ignatz nomination right now by SPX. But it's very beautifully drawn. It's risographed, silk screen, and like just very much made of love. It's about a horror story, but like also it's about these two teens and their relationship together.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you everybody for sharing these recommendations.
Can
Yeah.
Can I sneak in and recommend like one more that I meant to talk about from the start? My friend Maria does a zine called Mocha Chocolate Mama, and it deals with like each issue of it is a female, black female in like a historically known black female, and she just lays out the the history and her thoughts and feelings and experience that are tied to the figure, and it's well written and it's informative and it's great. I think it's also essential in my mind.
Can you say that name again?
Mocha Chocolata Mama. Mocha MOCHA, and Chocolata CHOCOLATA, and then Mama. So.
And that brings me to a really good point for everybody who's watching. Like I said, we're streaming live, but this is gonna be rewatchable. As we're streaming right now live, we're using the auto-generated captions for closed captioning, which is not always great. But our awesome sponsor, Moosator, is going to go through and do handwritten captions after this has been posted. So if you're using the closed captions and they're not great right now, come back to it here in a little while for full, nicely done closed captions. And thanks again, Moosator, for doing that. I think that's it. I want to go around. This is going to be our last go around, just to tell everyone who's watching where they can find your work if they want to read more of your zines and your work. I'm going to start up at the top for me with Jonas.
Let's see. The two biggest ones, I would say, outside of the Quimby's bookstore, which is nationally known, and they carry a lot of my zines. But outside of that, there's a distro called Antiquated Future, and they carry several of them. Another distro, Portland Button Works. They carry several of the zines, and I'd say between those three places, those are the places to go, and they can all be found online.
And Jonas, do you want to take a second to plug Midwest Perzine Fest? I know you guys just had a big announcement.
Yeah. It was a fest. It was meant to be in person in early October, but times being what they are, we decided to make it go digital. And October 10th is going to be our event. We're going to have the virtual Zine Fest and hopefully a couple panels, reading, stuff like that. So yeah, look for that. There's going to be much more information released soon, but October 10th is going to be the fest. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, if you're enjoying the digital version of Kansas City ZineCon, I highly recommend checking out Midwest Perzine Fest, especially if you love Perzines. Kayla, can we hear from you where to find your stuff?
All of my stuff is online. You can order it physically and have it shipped to you, or you can get them digitally. But my website, kaylashaggy.gallery, is where you can find most of it.
Awesome, thank you. Alexa, what about you? Where can we buy your zines?
So you can visit my Etsy shop under Ulterior Zines. You can also go to my Instagram, Ulterior Zines, and there's 2 underscores after that. And then I have some of my zines at Wasted Ink Zine Distro there in Phoenix, Arizona. So you can check them out. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Definitely check that out. And Carmen, finally, where can we buy your zines?
Through my website, carmenpizarro.com, also through the KCZC website. And then if you look me up on Instagram or Twitter, Pizarro. You can find different links of like where to find it from, like in the UK and like other places that carry my stuff.
Awesome, thank you so much. Definitely recommend everyone watching to go check out these awesome Zinesters' work and buy copies of anything that looks interesting to you. Like we said throughout this panel, zines are a great way to learn about other people's experience. So I definitely recommend and endorse everybody here. Thanks again to our panelists for joining us. Thanks to everybody who's watching live or on the replay on YouTube. Have a good day, everybody. Enjoy the rest of KCZCon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.